The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, its red cliffs glowing like fire in the morning light. Cowboy Caleb Foster rode steadily across the rugged terrain, his rifle strapped across his back, eyes sharp for any sign of deer. Hunger gnawed at him, and the silence of the wild pressed against his ears. Every sound mattered out here: the scrape of a boot on stone, the rattle of a snake, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. His goal was simple: bring back meat for camp. But destiny had other plans, waiting just around the canyon bend. The air shifted suddenly. A sharp, violent sound cracked across the open sky, the report of a rifle. Caleb stiffened in the saddle, every muscle tensing as echoes bounced off the canyon walls. That wasn't the clean sound of a hunter. It was desperate, chaotic. He slid down from his horse and crouched low, boots crunching softly in the gravel as he edged closer to the source. Instinct told him to be cautious. In these lands, a man's life could end in seconds if he walked into the wrong scene. As he crept forward, the smell of gunpowder still clung faintly to the air. Caleb's eyes scanned the jagged rocks until a figure came into view. There, crumpled against the canyon wall, lay a young Apache woman. Blood seeped through her buckskin sleeve, staining it a deep crimson. Her bow lay broken beside her, an arrow snapped in half as if in surrender. Caleb's gaze darted to the horizon just in time to catch sight of two horsemen galloping away, dust plumes trailing behind them. Whoever they were, they had left her to die. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen. Every story he had heard around the campfire, every fight between his people and hers, surged through his mind. Cowboys and Apaches had never been allies. Helping her could mark him as a traitor to his own kind, or worse, drag him into a blood feud he had no part in. His fingers tightened around the stock of his rifle, and for a moment he thought about turning back. Better to walk away, to pretend he hadn't seen anything at all. But then her eyes fluttered open. Even through the haze of pain, they held a fire he could not ignore, dark eyes that carried both defiance and desperation. She tried to lift herself, but her strength faltered, and she slumped back against the rock. The sight cut deeper than he expected. Caleb was no stranger to wounds or hardship, but this was different. She wasn't just another casualty of the desert. She was a person fighting to survive. Against all reason, his chest tightened with something unfamiliar. He lowered his rifle and knelt beside her, speaking softly, though he doubted she understood. "You'll die out here if I leave you." Her lips moved, whispering broken words in English, stubborn even in weakness. "No. Cowboy help. Apache strong." She tried to push him away, but her hand trembled, powerless. Caleb let out a long breath, muttering under his hat, "Damn fool I am." Carefully, he slid one arm under her shoulders and lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, far too light, her body weakened by blood loss. His horse shifted uneasily as Caleb approached, as if sensing the strangeness of the situation. With effort, he placed the woman across the saddle and mounted behind her, holding her steady against him. The ride back was slow, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Caleb's thoughts spun like dust in the wind. He had gone out hunting deer, just another day in the life of a cowboy. Yet now he carried an enemy in his arms. He didn't know her story, didn't know if saving her would cost him his own life. But something in him refused to let her die alone. By the time the sun sank low, shadows stretching long across the sand, Caleb reached his camp. He dismounted carefully, lowering the woman onto a blanket by the fire pit. She stirred faintly but didn't wake. Caleb fetched water from a canteen, dampening a cloth and pressing it gently to her forehead. The blood on her sleeve had dried into a stiff crust, and he knew infection could set in if he didn't act fast. Without hesitation, he tore strips from his own shirt, wrapping her wound as best he could. His rough hands trembled slightly as he worked, unaccustomed to such delicate care. When the fire finally crackled to life, casting orange light against the rocks, Caleb sat back and watched her. She was young, perhaps no older than 20, her features proud and strong even in weakness. He wondered what path had brought her here, what story lived behind her wounded silence. The desert had a way of erasing lives quickly, and yet here she was, clinging to survival with every shallow breath. Caleb felt the weight of the decision he had made. If his fellow cowboys found out, they'd never forgive him. If her people found out, they might never trust him. Hours passed, and the desert night grew colder. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries haunting under the stars. Caleb fed the fire with dry branches, keeping the flames alive. He should have been asleep, preparing for another day's ride, but instead he kept his vigil beside the wounded woman. Every so often she shifted, murmuring words in Apache he couldn't understand. Once, her hand twitched as if reaching for something she had lost. Caleb's chest tightened again, though he couldn't say why. He was supposed to be a hardened cowboy, a man who lived by his own code. But here he was, guarding the life of someone he was supposed to call an enemy. Near midnight, her eyes opened again, glinting in the firelight. For a long moment, she studied him in silence, her gaze searching, questioning. Finally, in a voice hoarse and uncertain, she whispered, "You saved me." "Why?" Caleb swallowed, his throat dry. He stared into the fire before answering. "Didn't seem right, leaving you to die." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his choice. He hadn't thought about consequences, about loyalty or vengeance. He had simply acted on the pull in his heart, and now there was no turning back. The woman's lips trembled into something that wasn't quite a smile. She spoke her name softly, as if sharing a secret. "Naya." The sound of it lingered in the air, fragile yet strong. Caleb nodded, repeating it under his breath, letting it settle on his tongue. Naya. For the first time, the nameless figure in his arms had become someone real, someone with a story worth saving. She closed her eyes again, but not before whispering one last phrase. "Cowboy heart. Not same as others." The words struck him deeper than he expected. Caleb leaned back against a rock, the fire warming his weary body. He looked out at the endless stretch of desert, the sky filled with stars brighter than lanterns. He had gone out that morning in search of meat, nothing more. But the desert had a way of twisting fate, turning hunters into guardians, strangers into companions. Somewhere deep inside, Caleb knew his life had just changed. Whatever lay ahead, it would not be the same. He had brought back more than he ever imagined. He had brought back a wounded Apache woman who, somehow, had already found a place in his heart. The desert night spread wide and silent, broken only by the crackle of Caleb's fire and the distant howl of coyotes. The stars hung heavy above, cold and watchful, while the flames cast long shadows across the rocks. Caleb shifted uneasily on his bedroll, his gaze never straying far from the wounded Apache woman lying nearby. Her wound was wrapped in cloth torn from his own shirt, the firelight flickering across her face. She breathed shallowly, but each rise and fall of her chest told him she was still fighting. He felt the weight of danger pressing in from both sides. If other cowboys discovered he had taken in an Apache woman, they would call him a traitor. They would spit his name, brand him disloyal to his own blood. And if her people found him, they might kill him outright, believing he had taken her captive. Caleb rubbed his hand over his face, wondering what in God's name he had gotten himself into. Yet, when he looked at her, he knew he couldn't have walked away. Hours slipped past, the fire shrinking into glowing embers. Caleb fought sleep, listening to every shift of the desert wind. Then finally she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open as she turned her gaze toward him. Her dark eyes studied him, sharp even through weakness, as if trying to see into his very soul. Her lips parted, and in halting, broken English, she whispered, "You save me." "Why?" The words were fragile, but they pierced through the night like an arrow. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was low, steady, though his heart thudded hard in his chest. "Couldn't leave you to die out there." Simple words, nothing more. Yet in them lived all his conflict, the duty to his people, the danger of his choice, and the undeniable pull of something greater. She stared at him for a long